Welcome to This Explainer. When you picture the President of the United States, you're probably imagining power, immense prestige, and, well, massive wealth, right? From sprawling estates to private jets, it's incredibly easy to just assume that ascending to the highest office in the land comes with an automatic sky-high net worth. But the reality of how political power actually impacts personal fortune is far more complicated, and honestly, a lot more fascinating than you might think. Today, we're going to look at the massive financial mistakes, the incredibly smart moves, and the outright blunders that have defined the bank accounts of our commanders-in-chief. Okay, let's dive right into this. We need to challenge that core assumption right out of the gate. Does sitting in the Oval Office actually guarantee you'll be rich? Throughout American history, the answer has swung wildly from a resounding yes to a heartbreaking no. We look at the modern political landscape and kind of assume it's always been this exclusive millionaires club, but history shows us that the economics of the presidency are a wild roller coaster of brilliant investments, catastrophic financial missteps, and shifting times. $80. Literally, $80. Now, that shockingly low number wasn't the bank balance of some broke college student. This was the exact amount of money to the name of Ulysses S. Grant. We're talking about a brilliant military genius, a revered Civil War hero, and a former president of the United States. It's a pretty stark reminder that fame and historical importance absolutely do not guarantee financial security. So, here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to track how presidential wealth generation has evolved by hitting 1. The wealth myth, 2. Financial blunders, 3. The land barons, 4. Power plays, and finally, 5. The post-presidency ATM. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the wealth myth. Broke in the Oval Office. See, in the early to mid-days of our nation, dedicating your life to public service often meant dedicating your life to financial struggle. Guys like James Buchanan and Abraham Lincoln came from truly humble log cabin beginnings and relied heavily on their modest presidential salaries. Andrew Johnson literally spent decades in public service and left the White House with almost nothing to show for it. But perhaps the smartest, if slightly sneaky financial move came from Harry Truman. He leaned so hard into the image of the struggling everyday American post-presidency that Congress actually felt bad for him and created the taxpayer-funded presidential pension. But the kicker? A recent investigation revealed Truman actually had the modern equivalent of millions quietly hidden away. A brilliant, if highly questionable, financial maneuver. Which brings us to Section 2, financial blunders. Losing it all. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer whiplash of Ulysses S. Grant's bank account. He left the White House with a pretty solid chunk of change, only to commit a massive financial blunder. He entrusted his entire life savings to a Wall Street firm run by his son and a swindler named Ferdinand Ward. It turned out to be a complete Ponzi scheme, leaving Grant with that $80 we talked about earlier. But Grant made one final, incredibly smart move. Dying of throat cancer, he feverishly wrote his memoirs. Published just after his death, they became an absolute bestseller, generating a staggering $450,000 for his family and completely saving them from ruin. But hey, Grant wasn't the only one making massive blunders. Take Thomas Jefferson. At his peak, Jefferson sat on a fortune equivalent to 250 million modern dollars, built largely on his 5,000-acre Monticello plantation. Yet, his ultimate fate was total financial ruin. Jefferson's fatal flaw was his unyielding, expensive tastes. I mean, the guy went massively into debt, importing fine European wines, furniture, and thousands of rare books. He completely failed to balance his checkbook, and upon his death, his estate was so deeply underwater that his family was literally forced to sell off Monticello, the possessions, and the slaves just to cover his extravagant lifestyle. Let's shift gears now to Section 3, the land barons, real estate riches. Before the modern era of book deals and speaking tours, the smartest financial move a president could make was acquiring massive tracts of land. The blueprint for early American mega-wealth was heavily tied to sprawling estates. George Washington was a master of this. He inherited Mount Vernon, married into wealth with Martha, and then went on a massive buying spree, eventually amassing 52,000 acres across multiple states. His net worth peaked around $590 million in today's money. Similarly, James Polk and Andrew Jackson built immense wealth through savvy land deals and strategic marriages. But there was a catch. These land barons were often land-rich but chronically cash-poor, making them highly reliant on their presidential salary just to maintain their daily liquidity. And a huge tool for building this wealth was the Land Bounty Grant, basically public land handed out by the government to veterans as a thank you for their service. William Henry Harrison used these grants brilliantly to expand his Ohio holdings, building up a very significant real estate portfolio. Yet this highlights that exact same fatal flaw of being cash poor. When Harrison tragically died just 1 month into his term, his vast land holdings couldn't pay the immediate bills, and Congress actually had to step in with a special pension just to bail his widow out. Alright, moving into the modern era with Section 4, Power Plays, leveraging the office. Let's see how this builds, because Lyndon B. Johnson provides a textbook example of a wildly lucrative, if incredibly convenient, financial move. Step 1. His wife, Lady Bird, buys a failing radio station down in Texas. Step 2. LBJ, as a powerful congressman, conveniently oversees the FCC. Step 3. That very same station miraculously secures highly coveted and lucrative FCC licenses. Step 4. The Johnsons leverage that insane advantage to build a sprawling, multi-million-dollar media empire. It's the perfect illustration of how proximity to regulatory power can profoundly impact a politician's personal balance sheet. Which brings us to our final era. Section 5. The Post-Presidency ATM, Cashing In. This whole pivot to profit really began in earnest in the late 20th century. Leaving the White House was no longer a retirement into quiet public service. It was the start of a massive payday. Richard Nixon made the unprecedented move of monetizing his own disgrace, pulling in $600,000, which is about $2.5 million today, just to sit for television interviews with David Frost. Jimmy Carter reinvented himself through books and even won a $1 million Nobel Peace Prize. But Ronald Reagan, he really set the modern template. After his presidency, he cashed in on a massive $2 million speaking tour in Japan. They quickly realized that their fame and their stories were highly marketable assets. And man, did that template absolutely explode into a financial juggernaut in the 21st century. Look at the Clintons and the Obamas. Bill and Hillary Clinton famously left the White House buried in legal debt, but they made the brilliant move of turning the speaking circuit into a literal ATM, raking in over $100 million in fees alongside massive book deals. The Obamas took it a step further into the streaming age, securing a $65 million book advance and a $50 million Netflix production deal. They completely transformed political fame into 9-figure media empires. So, the crucial point we need to take away here is this. A stint in the executive branch acts as the ultimate financial launchpad, completely regardless of your prior wealth. Take Joe Biden. For decades, he was famously one of the poorest members of the Senate, actually juggling debt around 2009. But the moment he left the vice presidency in 2017, that exposure allowed him to instantly pull in $11 million from book deals and speeches in a single year. The office itself has literally become the ultimate asset. To kind of sum up this whole wild journey, consider a slightly tweaked quote from Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt actually lost a massive chunk of his trust fund early on in a failed cattle ranching blunder out west, but he salvaged his fortune with the incredibly smart move of cranking out 35 books, becoming a best-selling author, and retiring comfortably at his 235-acre Sagamore Hill estate. So, speak softly, carry a big stick, and an even bigger estate feels like the absolute perfect mantra for the history of presidential wealth. Which leaves us with this final massive question. We've gone from land bounty grants to Netflix production deals, from dying with $80 in the bank to securing $100 million payouts. As the post-presidential payday continues to skyrocket, how will future presidents monetize the Oval Office? Are we going to see tech startups, exclusive podcasts, or something we haven't even thought of yet? The intersection of political power and personal fortune is always evolving. I highly encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating history, and we'll see you next time on The Explainer.